Professor Tali Hatuka, she is with us from Tel Aviv University, and Güven Arif Sargın from Middle East Technical University. But I have to say, Professor Sargın will not be able to be with us today due to some health problems. Though I should say he's fine. All right, then we have Tali Hatuka, Professor Hatuka from Tel Aviv University, and the title of the session is Towards an Industrial Urbanism. So I'm really glad to introduce Professor Hatuka, who is the founder of that discourse, let's say, with a series of recently published books and papers. Let me introduce you, Professor Hatuka. She's an architect and urban planner, the founder head of the Laboratory of Contemporary Urban Design in the Department of Geography and Human Environment at Tel Aviv University. Her research interest includes city design in the digital age, public sphere and social dynamics, industrial development and urbanism, urban regeneration and visioning, and the future city. She worked for several projects, urban development and designing housing and industrial areas. Her research recently, urban design and civil protests, industrial urbanism, were exhibited at MIT in 2014. Following the special issue of Built Environment, which was entitled Industrial Urbanism, exploring the city production dynamic, her co-authored book, co-authored with Eran Ben Joseph from MIT, is forthcoming, The City in the New Industrial Age. So I would like to give floor to Professor Hatuka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Do you hear me well? Yeah? Okay, great. So thank you for inviting me. Actually, it's a great opportunity for me because, as you said, the book with Eran Ben Joseph is actually going to be out on the shelves this coming March. And I have actually good news. It's going to be also free access for download. So what I was hoping to do today, and I will start with my presentation, I will share the screen. I was hoping to give you a sort of overview regarding this idea of new industrial urbanism. As you kindly mentioned, this is a ongoing project that I'm working with Eran Ben Joseph for over the last decade. It included both theoretical exploration, but also very much practical projects. We did a few strategic plans in Israel and in elsewhere. So what I was hoping to do is, again, say a few things about the book, about this concept. This book was very much oriented towards the urban designers and the physical planners, because we realized that there is so much in economic discourse and in the social discourse regarding the Fourth Industrial Revolution, but there is really little about it, though it's starting to emerge in urban design and in planning. Urban planning, mainly I'm talking about physical planning. So this book, as I said, is going to be published March 2022. And it's going to be also open access. So as you mentioned as well, we did an exhibition entitled Industrial Urbanism at MIT 2014. And also we had this edited volume, and all these ideas that we have accumulated were also being implemented in real strategic plans in Israel. Coming back to the question you have asked Ida in the last session, I would say that, industrial urbanism, or in general, industrial development in the contemporary age, does not have a scale. It's actually can take place in the rural areas, in the urban density, but each one has to have its own kind of flavor and strategies. And this is what I'm going to say and talk about today. So this is the organization of the book. I'm not going to go into details to each part of it, but in general, the first part is talking about the history and the development of this discourse and where we are at today. The second part includes many case studies and specifically address the key 3 strategies that we see today in physical development in association with industrial development, which is clustering, reinventing, and hybridity. I will touch on this a little bit. And the last part is actually what we'd like to offer to the table. This is a new industrial urbanism and how we see today the future development of industry and the city. So, I mean, I think that for us, I missed the first part of Ida, but so maybe I will repeat some of the things that she was saying. I saw that she gave a wonderful overview of why now, but the question why now is not so obvious. But of course, everyone, when we talk about why now, point to the 4th Industrial Revolution. And I would like to share with you, let's see if it will work, a short video. This is not mine, this is from the World Economic Forum, but it gives like a very quick 2-minute film that shows where we are at now and the evolution, like in really very concise film that actually pose a quick questions towards the end. So be with me. Oh, sorry. Again. So I think that why for me this film is so important, because as you can see in my next slide, it shows first that humans are the center of production, but at the same time we have to remember that each industrial revolution bring with it many challenges, but also influence dramatically the role of humans in the industry development. And I think for us as architects and urban designers, we have to understand that we have always had a key part in the reaction to this different industrial revolution. And when we look at the history of factories, for example, and what you see at this slide are the iconic factories from early 20th century till today, we can see also, please look at the bottom part of the slide, you can see also the way the uses within factories have been changed. So if in the early 20th century, the design of the factory was minimal, if any, and it was mainly focused on production, we can see that towards the end of the 20th century and even today, we see the factory as an ecosystem. If we think about it, about the different new kind of celebrated factories that usually includes offices, public amenities, greens, and a sort of support for the workers. So we have gone a long way in the way we conceive the relationship between work and workers within the factories themselves, but also, of course, as has been shown in the previous presentation, we also see the relationship, the tight relationship between the Industrial Revolution and the urban planning development. And I think that, for example, as have been discussed before, there is always a reaction of the planners to the different industrial revolutions. So the first industrial revolution, it was again unplanned industrial development in the city. The prototype, by the way, was the integrated city because factories were spread all over. Later, the second industrial revolution, that which focused mainly on electrical energy and mass production, has been the one that pushed for these new planning models and the emergence of zoning and so forth, so garden city, company towns, and so forth. And then from the 1950s till the end of the 20th century, the third industrial revolution that was focusing mainly on automation and computerization have created for us this kind of idea of constructing the suburban urban industrial parks. And today, I mean, one of the big question is what now? What the fourth industrial revolution will bring with it? And we already see all over the world in different parts, in different cities, the idea of integration and the relationship between this digitization, IoT, cyber system, and how they are part of this idea of integrating back the industry to the city, not just because they are clean, but also because our lifestyle have been changed dramatically. So the prototype of back to the city on the integrated city is on the table. The question, or the key question, is how to do it. And what is our role as physical planners in this process? I have to say that clearly, the way these ideas were being developed early 20th century with the different models, this is not the way to go ahead in the early 21st century. So we cannot come today with a model of the garden city or the company town, mainly because we have big cities with many issues and problems, and also the social and the economic problems are totally different. So the question is not whether or not we are going to integrate industry and the city, but how should we do that? And I think that the premises of this book is first that manufacturing constitutes a significant portion of the world total economic activity, and that we have to address this, that industry occupy large areas of our built environment, yet we tend to think about industry in an economic or political context. I have to say that up till the last 10 years, it was very hard to find planners and architects to talk about this issue at all. And then I think that over the last decade, we also see, and that's why I was so happy that you invited me, all over the world, specifically in Germany, in the US, and also in Turkey, the notion that the physicality of industry is super, super important. And the way we address it today is less and less sustainable. And the question for us in the next decade is not whether growth in manufacturing is going to occur, but where and how we should develop it. So I think that today what we understand is that, and again, all these visuals are taken from the book, is that manufacturing, by the way, advanced or traditional, we do not, we have to think also about the traditional manufacturing is more than economic challenge, but and it's a challenge. It includes 4 related dimensions. First, the challenge of economy. Again, Ida was addressing this, the increasing global competition. And the question is how we maintain industry within cities, regions, and countries. This is not an obvious question anymore. The other question and the other dimension, which is very much important to think about it, is society. We know nowadays that unemployment is going to be a major, major challenge for many society societies everywhere. So some of the downfalls of this fourth industrial revolution implies that some of the workers will be out of job. So the question is, again, how we address the question, the social problems, as has been indicated in the film that you just saw. The third question is, of course, planning, demographic growth, densification, urbanization. And we have to remember that some of the cities actually evacuated the industrial areas from their cities, and how we think or reintegrate them back. And the last and fourth dimension, which is very important, is environment, and how, again, we just have the climate conference, and how changes in consumption and the cost of energy in transportation of good are going to influence the development of cities. And for us as urban and architect, I think there are three things that we have to think about. First, strategies. Again, the strategies for integrating and thinking about industrial development are really vast, and they are not new. There are cities and countries all over the world that are investing quite a lot of energy in this. And the question is, what physical planning and design strategies should cities pursue to retain, attract, and increase manufacturing activity? I can say that the answer for this is not unified. And of course, each city will have to address a different methodology and research to think about which strategy is best for its future resilience. The question of regulation, again, it's a very contextual question, but it's clearly that we have to think and readdress regulation. And the question is, should contemporary manufacturing be subjected to the same rules and zoning regulation as it proceeded? So again, if the idea was to separate manufacturing from the city, the question is whether or not this kind of regulation is still valid. And the question of design. What criteria should we consider when we designing a flexible new industrial areas? And I think that these questions, and even though we want very much to push this idea forward and to develop the idea of new industrial urbanism, we have three key challenges that are not yet solved. First, a very important challenge, conceptual. What exactly do we mean when we speak about industry, manufacturing, or production? Which industries we refer to? I mean, this is a very important question. And again, from my experience, every time I do a strategic plan for a different region or a city, this is the first thing that I start with. What are we talking about? And again, it's really changing from one place to another. And this is the first basic element we need to address. The second thing, which I think is very important, is the social. The public is not with us, right? The general public and political leaders often lack the exposure to modern industry, and often they are seeing industry as something heavy, polluted, something which is not good for the city. What they want to have is these high-tech, nice, beautiful buildings in their cities, and they believe this will attract entrepreneurs and the funding for the city. So again, the social dimension and the political dimension is crucial. And the other challenge is, of course, spatial. I mean, I think that most cities today don't have a clear strategy how to encourage and to retain industry in their cities. And there is a limited and declining supply of urban land zone for industry in cities. So this is a very complex problem. On one hand, we as urban designers and planners do not really know what to do in terms of developing new industrial urbanism. On the other hand, also, we have to think about all the challenges at the political level and the social level, which is also vague. So we are, I think, in a very interesting, actually, and super exciting period of time, because all is happening now. And the question how we get into the discourse. By the way, from historical perspective, in the early 20th century, the people that actually very much pushed the ideas regarding urban development in association with industry were not the urban planners, were not the architects. They were actually people that came from outside the discipline. And for me, it's very important that we are going to join this discussion. So what the book tries to do is to map different strategies. And as I said, when we analyze what is happening all over the world nowadays, we see three key approaches in terms of industrial contemporary development. So one of the key approach in terms of physical development is clustering new industries. So food tech and different kind of new industries are developing an approach to kind of integrate and put all these amenities together and to develop a physical plan that would support this kind of growth. Another approach is the regeneration of industrial areas within city. Clustering is often taking place, by the way, at the regional level. Regenerating industrial areas, I will show a few examples, is taking place often within a city, and forming hybrid district. This is a third strategy that maybe I saw that Nina Rappaport is talking about, and maybe she will address it a little bit more. This is an approach that often take even at the level of the district, so it's much more lower scale. And what we did in the book is analyze many different cases. I have to say that all these approaches and strategies are not just physical, they're also being supported by management and other policy tools. And the book is analyzed each case study from these different angles. But again, because we tried and we wanted very much to appeal to the urban designers and the physical planner, there is a lot of analysis of the physical plans themselves and the manifestation of industry and the relationship of industry and the urban development in general. So what we see here, for example, this is a slide that discusses the clustering of new industries. And we can see that there are 4 examples here from the Netherlands, Taiwan, Sweden, and Massachusetts. What's interesting about this is that clustering can have any scale. It can also can have different morphologies. So for example, the Food Tech Valley in the Netherlands is linear, it's autonomous, it takes place at the rural area. And if you can see from this slide, I can show with my arrow, the cluster itself is linear, it's taking place all over this area. In white are the residential buildings. And what they have done, they developed a project, a physical project, landscape project to kind of connect all these dots. In Taiwan, for example, they created another strategy. So again, the industry is in orange, in yellow is the academy. And you can also see, this is something that I've missed in saying, all new industries and all industrial development is integrating academy activities, industry activities, and with the more day-to-day activities. And in Taiwan, what we see this integration of these three triangles, and you can see it's a totally different spatial strategy. Industry is at the edge, but again, it is integrated into these 3 different uses. But if here in the Netherlands, it's autonomous development, at Taiwan, it's adjacent, and it really influences on the day-to-day interaction of the residents and the workers. In Stockholm, it's also very interesting approach in terms of spatial strategy. The university is in the center. You can see the icon here. Surrounded by the industry, surrounded by the residential. So industry is actually the core of the area. And again, the last example is Massachusetts, Cambridge, Kendall. What is interesting again, it's an urban small-scale agglomeration comparing to the rural development of the Netherlands. But what you can see here is a very integrated cluster between the industry, academy, and residential. The point of this is actually to show that you can take a strategy like clustering and develop different spatial strategies. and it can take place in different scales. This goes the same for the regenerating strategy. Here, again, we took different examples. Again, I show you the summary slide. In the book, you have lots of details and explanations on each case. But here we have, again, 4 cases: Singapore, Hamburg, Germany, New York City, and LA. And what we see here is actually, this is a great slide for the urban designer, because here we can see how the urban design has a crucial role in connecting industry back to the different areas in the city. So here again, it's either adjacent or totally integrated in terms of the spatial form. But you can see that the analysis is totally different. So here emphasis is given to the park, to the public spaces. And again, suddenly the industrial area, which was very much the backyard of many cities, is becoming part of the urban life of the city. We have to understand also that workers today want to use amenities and public services near their spaces of work and do not want to commute and to wait until they go home. Here again, I don't have the time to actually review all these different cases, but it's clear that each one, and again in the book, you can see how each one of them have used totally different approach. In Singapore, for them, what was the main important issue was connectivity, how to connect the residential, which you can see here, the built form, with the industrial area. And they did it through parks, a set of parks. In Hamburg, it was very important for them to create an ecosystem. And then they invest a lot in the waterfront redevelopment. The same goes for New York City. And in LA, for them was very much to develop a mixed-use industrial district. But for me, what's important to say is that in all these cases, the physical approach is coming together again with much more complex social management and policy, which I don't have the time to review for each case, but it is an approach that actually support additional actions. And the last, I think, which is becoming very hype and very dominant, is the hybrid approach, developing very much integrated mixed areas. And what you see here are Barcelona, Spain, District 22, Innovation District in Medellin, Colombia, Central East Side, Portland, and Shenzhen in China. And here, this is, again, 4 very different projects. I think that what's important in all these projects is to understand whether or not they are top-down or developed organically. In most cases, this is a project coming from top-down. It doesn't happen just like that. In all of these cases, zoning and the redefinition of zoning was the crucial act in developing the hybrid approach. But again, after taking the decision regarding zoning, there is much to do of how to integrate and which block should do what. So again, I think that the most integrated zoning approach you can see in Barcelona, by the way, and also in Shenzhen, which is a very extreme, different project. And I think that in general, the idea is that here again, this is another image from the book. What you can see here is all the different cases that are analyzed in the book. And in yellow, you can see the main spatial strategy regarding the development of industry. And I think this is a very important slide because you can see that definitely each city has its own spatial strategy. Context play here, key crucial approach, and also, and this is important to say, the type of industry. So obviously, if we talk about, I didn't talk about it much, but again, if we talk about LA, which is very much here LA, fashion district in LA, So the case and the integration and the approach and also the tools that in terms of physical design are totally different from the large scale intervention in the food tech linear development in the Netherlands. Maybe next time, if you will invite me, Olgu, I will give you a presentation on each case, which is fascinating in itself, but I wanted to come and say something about the new industrial urbanism, what we are offering and what we have learned from all these cases. So for us, I think that Iran and for myself, the question was, what criteria should guide the development of contemporary industrial spatial development? And can we use industry as a prime catalyst in retrofitting cities? And this is very important because if you remember, historically in the 90s or in the 80s, commerce and the development of city centers was the prime catalyst in retrofitting cities. But nowadays, what we talk about, we realize that commercial development and commercial activities are changing, and the focus is going to industry. And again, the question is, can we use this both challenge and also idea in thinking about our cities? And for us, the answer is obvious. Yes, urban manufacturing requires a different approach that recognizes people as a vital factor in competitive advantage of cities. I think that maybe I didn't emphasize this enough. Our lifestyles have changed dramatically. We cannot commute like 2 hours for factories and go back. We have to think about the people, and we have to think about their daily life. And again, Ida was mentioning this about the compact city. Great, compact city is great, but we have to think about the daily life of people and how their activities, both working and living, are somehow supported by the city. So the new industrial urbanism should reintroduce human-centered design to manufacturing facilities. The human center is very, very important for us. And what we offer in the book is like these 4 premises. We argue that economy today is changing dramatically, and we are moving towards globalization. The COVID-19 actually just pushed this idea even more. We understand that territorial attachment and proximity is a source of competitive advantage for industries that gets involved in the internationalization process. We understand that the local production is very important, the local vis-a-vis the global. So, and the other thing, which is the second dimension, is that coordination. Industry today should be seen as an ecosystem. Even when we think about urban zone in the city that is focused on industry, we have to think about it in a wider context and think about it as part of an ecosystem. So in Ankara or in Istanbul, we cannot just look at the industrial area isolated from what's going on in the region as a whole. We have to understand it as part of an ecosystem, and it needs to be coordinated and not compete with other areas, because today the transfer and the provision of goods is very interlinked. And of course, we need to think about society, which is, I think, the big challenge. I have to say, I'm working on different strategic plans here in Israel. And the question is also the human resource, okay? Who is going to work where and how? So community institutions, universities, all these community assets are very important for the success of new industrial urbanism. All the cases that we have analyzed, by the way, localism and community are the central key component for the success. And in terms of planning, we are the 4th dimension in this, is that we see that in all cases, planners have defined diffuse systems, which means mixed-use zones that permit industrial use, flexible building codes, and arrangement that foster coexistence. But again, this is like a very generic thing. And So we wanted to develop in this book like 4 key planning concepts that actually break down this diffuse system idea. And what we suggest is that new industrial urbanism should follow at least 4 concepts. Secular strategies, I will explain each one of them briefly. Integrative approach in the city scale, coding complexity, which refer mainly to zoning, and synchronic typologies. I will explain each one of them now shortly. So in terms of secular strategies, what we have seen and learned from different cases is that industry is not, again, isolated system. It's part of a regional system, and it influences the urban ecosystem, and then there is the local development. So when we look at the regional, by the way, I don't know much about Ankara in terms of industrial development, but we see that in all the regional ecosystem of industry, there is a very strong collaboration between the government, industry, and academy. And this is, in many cases, have influenced the success of this regional ecosystem, industrial ecosystem. In terms of urban ecosystem, we think that strategies, again, I think that, again, Ida was mentioned transition zones, but we have to think about integrated environment that think about the different multiple uses of space, but in a way that will, again, support flexibility, but at the same time support the type of industry we are talking in this particular city. So for example, in the US, in Kendall Square, they have biotech. Okay, the urban ecosystem there is working in a very particular way. In Tel Aviv, we have mainly high tech and startups. So again, it's a totally different ecosystem. And I think that when we talk about the urban ecosystem, we have, again, not just to implement physical strategies, we have to connect it to the industry itself. What type of industry are we addressing? And in terms of the local ecosystem, and I will talk about it in a few seconds, we have to think about the type of integration we want to create. Is this integration in the same building? Is it in the building next door? So the book, and I will come to it, I didn't address this, but I will talk about it in a minute, about synchronic typologies. The other thing that we have to think about, and what we have learned, is that there are many different integrating approach. So connectivity, encouraging urban design standard and planning policies that support the building of mixed-use industrial neighborhoods connected to wider region by different types of transportation system, diversity of local economies, conserve natural resources and farmland and so forth. So connectivity is not just connecting one point with the other, but seeing the whole infrastructure as a whole. So we want to think about transportation, not just as at the local level, but see it as part of the regional level. Complexity, we see that there are, in all these cases, symbiotic relationships. What is symbiotic relationship? So industrial typologies, businesses, housing types, all these create a sort of complexity that also give interest and vivaciousness, vivid life into these areas. And then the character, identity. Again, I think that one of the things that I feel uncomfortable with, and I think new industrial urbanism, or in general industrial development, is doing now, is understand that this kind of urban park that support industry are like no place. They can be everywhere and nowhere. They look all over the world the same. So when we talk about industrial development in all these places that I've been showing you, they are all have their own character and identity, and people want and happy to be part of this identity. So we are not talking about at all unified approach to industrial urbanism. And this is maybe, I don't have a lot, I don't want to review this slide, but I think that the most important thing is how to code this complexity, how to regulate this complexity. of course, flexible zoning, but what does it mean? And again, if we do flexible zoning, this is directly influencing environmental and ecological regulation, and of course, performance standards, and then all these issues of adaptivity. So again, this is a long, long list of lessons that we have learned from other cases, but it's not enough to say we are going to change the zoning. We have to think about all these issues. And I think this is, I'm sorry that I didn't bring more images of the synchronic topologies, but what we have done in this book is we analyzed about 6-7 projects from around the world that actually integrate industry or production and housing in the same building. Very new, innovative projects, mainly in London, in Canada. But fascinating projects. Each one of them is doing it in a very different way, but they think about the space, program, infrastructure, time in a very different way. So sometimes industry is taken at the street level, sometimes at the underground, sometimes integrate in the same building. And so a worker have its own working space in the same floor and so forth. But synchronization, again, unlike mixing, does not replace or does not compete with one another. So this is, again, coming back to regulations. In order to do it well, we have to think about environmental, noise, public amenities, and so forth. So one of the issues that I can say, do I have more time? I'm going to finish soon.
Please take your time, Tali, because Professor Sargon will not be available, so we can be a little bit flexible.
I don't have, okay, great. I don't have much, but I think that now I'm looking at what I brought you. It would be nice if I could show you some examples of these synchronic typologies, because I think this is like the very much cutting edge approach to integrate industry or production and housing at the same complex, and there are various approach to this idea. And I think that, okay, so I have 5 more minutes, and I just want to say that again, when we think about new industrial urbanism, different from early 20th century, that the focus was very much on the physical. If we want to be successful, we have to think about the people, we have to think about the making, and then we have to think about the strategies we want to apply. So it's not the same as early 20th century that we had these models and we applied them on the city, and then we looked for the people to come and work in the factories. Here, the situation nowadays, the situation is very, very different. And again, I want to emphasize each industry because I didn't talk about it in details. I mean, I didn't address in details each case. Each industry has its own requirements. Now I work, for example, in Eastern Galilee, in Israel, on a food tech valley. Food tech valley, for example, behaved totally different from industry that focus on computation. Okay, they have different needs, different typologies, different approach to the regional ecosystem. So it's a totally different story. So coming back, I want to emphasize people, making, industry, and then developing the strategy. That's why it was very much important for us to open and to show how strategies in addressing industry today are very wide. And I know that I feel very uncomfortable that everyone are now pushing hybridity. Hybridity is not relevant to all the cases. And it's not just the urban, it's also the regional. For me, new industrial urbanism, and that's why we say new industrial urbanism and not new industrial city, because urbanism refers also to the region. It includes both the local, the region, and the city. And so for me, when I look at this slide, and this is the way we open this short presentation, so we can see the development of industry. In orange, you see the industry, so this is the integrated city, with the first industrial revolution, the zoning and the industry is going out and located in the periphery of the city. This is, by the way, it's an abstraction of the Tony Garnier industrial city. And the park, urban park, industrial park, where you have the industry isolated in the suburbia. And then today, with the fourth industrial city, we see the coming back of the industry to the city, the integration, the rethinking, the reassessment of the industry relationship with the city. And the reason I put also Industry 5 is because from historical perspective, we know we're just a point in a long process. I think this is where we are at now. I think that many of us are trying to figure out how to do it. And again, if I can say something from my experience, because I worked in cities, in the region, North region, which is very peripheral, isolated area, and also at the south of Israel, I can say that in each place, I use totally different methodology and totally different approach. And I always started from the assessment of the industry, the assessment of the people that work in place, and only later thinking about the physical development. But there is no doubt from my perspective that the physical development and the physical approach and the urban design is a crucial role in the success of new industrial development in addressing the challenges of contemporary age. So for me, I just want to finish. It is time to look at manufacturing with fresh eyes and to rethink and reimagine industrial urbanism. I think this is going to be a major task for designers, planners, and policymakers. We just started, but I think that we are have, again, important role in all of this. And we have to remember, maybe as Kevin Lynch said, effective policy or effective design works on the boundaries between dream and reality, linking deep needs and obscure desire to open experience and test. And I think, yes, we are in exciting times where we test new approaches, new strategies, but we have to get into this discourse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tali, for this wonderful overview with thought-provoking notes and remarks, let's say, along with the conceptual models, which will be revisited by the urbanists, both architects and planners, to be applied in different contexts with the very peculiar forces of the local context. So once we started to think about industrial urbanism, then you introduced a new industrial urbanism, which connotes slightly something else, because you, I think, specifically address the continuity of the close relationship between the urbanism and the industry itself as a kind of generator of the urbanity in different periods of the history. So it was a wonderful point, I think, to think about that, because somehow we think that some emergent, forces are quite new and original, but it is always in the continuation of the historical transformation and transformation and development, let's say. So before asking my questions, I a few questions. I would like to give floor to the audience if they have any question to Professor Hatuka. You can turn on your camera if you wish. By the way, you can ask your questions in Turkish if you select the English option in the interpretation button at the bottom, then you can easily hear the translation. We have a question in chat box. Thanks for your well-organized presentation. I would like to ask, what do you think about the role of creative industries and their effects to change the spatial development of cities? The question is asked by Meltem Aykan. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that creative industries, I mean, it would be great to understand what you mean by creative industries. What do you refer to by creative industries?
If Meltem Hanım would like to respond that. Because it's a very, you know, generic.
Yeah. I know. That's why I was. So I want to say that we tend to rely too much on creative industries. Societies are pyramids, right? So we have at the bottom different kind of workers, and we have also people that are more creative and advanced. But when we think about the next phase of urban development and social development, we have to take into account all varieties of industries. So I want to say that creative industries cannot emerge in any place. So some cities can host creative industries and some cities cannot. I work in cities in Israel. They also ask me, what about creative industries? Let's develop a zone for creative industries. And I respond, who will come? So again, I think that creative industries emerge in particular contexts. They need particular infrastructure. They are very much connected to particular human capital. And I think that creative industries is just one portion of the industrial development and the urban development. And I think that we cannot rely on creative industries. They work well, for example, in Tel Aviv. They do not successfully emerge in the peripheral areas in Israel. And this is, for example, not even relevant. So yes, they can be successful. They can be used as a vehicle or as a tool, but they emerge in particular contexts, very urban, cosmopolitan context. They really require particular amenities and conditions, and I personally, I think that when I start project on industrial development, I do not rely on this. I mean, I think you cannot force creative industries to emerge in a context that doesn't have the infrastructure to support it. And when I say infrastructure, it's not just physical infrastructure, it's the institution, the academic institutions and so forth. It's the vibe, it's the culture and so forth. I don't know if I answered.
I think you answered perfectly. Well, as much as we learned from the literature, Tali, the creative industrial people, how do you say, do not want to be zoned, do not want to be controlled, right? So it's a kind of emergent process, which for sure could be conditioned by the responsive urban strategies, policies to emerge as well. But it will be very simplistic to put some, design guidelines, for instance, for the creation of the industry, creative industry within the city as a kind of spatial zone in itself. And this is what I would think as well. So Ehsan has a question. Yes, Ehsan, please.
Thank you again for the really useful and insightful presentation. I mean, one issue that I'm wondering about is outside of Turkey is this synchronization of different functions in a given place. For example, I mean, I have the feeling that the need for office space is increasing as manufacturing value is created in non-manufacturing areas such as, R&D, design, etc. So do you see a trend where industrial areas incorporate more office areas, office spaces? Because in the Turkish paradigm of industrial land use, there is an allergy to accommodate office spaces in industrial areas or give very limited rights to office places because the infrastructure is so costly to build, so they want industry to benefit rather than the office areas. So do you see a changing trend as we move towards new industrial activities? So that's the first question I have.
So let me answer this because
Please.
I will forget. So I have to say that again, it's a very contextual question, but I think that the trend that you have mentioned in Turkey is now being rethought and assessed in the US. For example, in the US, even in Kendall Square, many of the industrial areas were being developed as offices, and now they stopped that. Now they realize that they want to keep industry and they want to keep the production spaces. So Israel, the same, is at the face of Turkey, but now we see in Germany and also in the US trends that kind of reassess this approach and stop this process, because offices and housing will always compete with industry. And the question is whether or not we actually keep industry in the cities. So many cities now today are facing a problem. They don't have any more industrial sites because they accommodated offices and residential in these exact sites. So this is a very timely question, the question you ask. And I think that what we see all over the world is different approaches. It really depends where the government is at. I think that, for example, in Israel, I can say we are about 20 years behind what's happening in the West in terms of industrial development, not the industry, but industrial urban development. The urban approach to industry is not very much developed, so we are behind. But I don't know exactly where Turkey is at. So in terms, because this whole discourse is new, but the Scandinavian countries are really much ahead of us. Okay, so I think that when you ask this question, when you talk about Turkey, again, you are at a particular point in this process. Israel, I'm telling you, is 20 years behind this process, and the Scandinavian and the more advanced Western countries are really ahead of us. Yeah. So again, there are many examples how they integrate and use the relationship between industry and cities in Scandinavian countries, and how they benefit even from electricity, gas, waste, and all these issues already in the 80s of the previous century. So I would say this is a very contextual question, and this is the challenge. This competition is the exact challenge. And I see myself as an urban planner. I see my role as trying to explain politicians that they need to deal with this competition and reserve and preserve their industrial sites, and not to enter and not to accommodate offices, or at least not to accommodate only offices in a way that would compete and destroy the industrial amenities.
I mean, my question was more on the incorporation of offices into the coexistence of both at the same time, rather than crowding out the industrial areas, in preference.
So I would say, again, I work now on a plan that is trying to accommodate this, but I really restrict the amount or the percentages of offices in the industrial area. So I do accommodate even residential units and accommodate offices, but in the regulation and in the guidelines, I restrict it to 20 up to 30% in order to preserve the industrial areas. And actually I create a sort of a plan that kind of give space to each one of these activities without destroying or competing. But again, this is really regulating the industrial areas, but
the other question that I had is about this evolution that you have shown from Industry 1.0 to 4.0 and how the space follows the industrial trend. But again, maybe it's contextual again, but I presume it could be similar in Israel. The coexistence of Industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 in the same city. We see, manufacturers that, produce with Industry 1.0, habits, and then, we see producers with 3 or 4 zero. So how do these coexist? What's the implication for the space of this coexistence of different industrial moods, let's say?
Well, this is a very complex question because in general, I mean, I'm a daughter of an industrial worker who worked 40 years in the same factory. He stopped working in this factory when the factory was shut down. It was a very important factory in Israel, the most progressive, first automated factory. And I think that through him, I understood that actually through his work and all, my childhood, I understood that industry is not forever, coming back to your question. Industry or factories has a lifetime of about 40 years, 40, 50 years. This implies that all the factories that we have today might not be here in 10, 20 years. So, and this is one of the big challenges and dilemmas for urban planners and urban designers. We'd have to develop spaces and areas for projects, buildings, and amenities that might be substituted or replaced in 20 years from today. And this is very different from residential because residential areas are quite stable. If you think about Istanbul, that I know better than Ankara, so residential areas are stable. Maybe they are being regenerated and updated, but in general, they are stable. Industrial areas are not. And this flexibility and the question of time is crucial. And this is why I placed this linear slide that talks about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't mean that the same manufacturer stayed in the same place. And I have to say that I think this is a question that, or this issue of time and flexibility and adaptivity is one of the big challenges that us as urban planners need to address. We have to think that the change in industrial areas is really fast. Of course, there are always like big factories that can survive 100 years and more, but I don't think that we have so many of them all over the world. I'm not sure you have them in Ankara. And also we have to think about, again, coming back to the question, what is industry? We, again, maybe in another opportunity, we will develop and I will show you all the different types of industry that we address today. So that's why when we start, we have to think about the types of industry and not just to jump to physical strategies. Because if these industries are working in a particular scale, needs particular amenities, and we have also to work with economists that will help us to think whether or not this industry is going to stay with us for long, or maybe there are new trends that will replace it. I mean, what happened in the company towns or in other, look at what happens now in Detroit or in big cities, the industrial cities in the US. Some of them are collapsed or facing really difficult economic problems. So it's not just the design. We have to think about the industry. We have to think about how they are being replaced and changed. Each industrial revolution replace the tool, change the tools, change the way we work with machine, and change the type of human labor. So this is something, it's a good exercise, by the way, for a project in a studio, in architectural and urban design studio. Mm-hmm. How to think about this adaptivity, and how even you can give an exercise. I'm now thinking for myself, yes, I would give exercise to my students. This is the industrial area. Think about it in 20, 30 years from today, and how, if we will need to change it, whether or not it is adaptive to changes. Because from historical development, historical perspective, this is what happened.
Thank you, Esenjan, for that question. Following the previous question of Esen on the integration of the office spaces and within industrial areas, another question comes regarding the coexistence of industry and housing. So the question asked by Elif Bek, how should the line between work and daily life for an worker is shaped or is to be shaped?
Again, is this a question I see at the chat?
Yes, in the chat.
Okay.
She thinks about the prospective integration of housing areas with the industrial zones, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that today we see two key trends. First, a trend that maybe I showed you, and because we talked about the urban, we forgot about the factories, but there are factories today, specifically in Asia, that actually support housing within the campuses. It's not just housing, it's all the public amenities, including sports and food and so forth, and even green areas. So one approach to this kind of question is to integrate everything at the object of the factory itself. And this is a very advanced and progress approach to what we've seen from the early 20th century, which the factory was just production space. Today, there are many factories that integrate everything. Another approach is to develop adjacent residential buildings, and many factories and entrepreneurs think about it because they also want to reduce the transportation and the commuting times of the workers. So this is the second approach. And the third approach, which I want to include, so three things, is this synchronic typologies. By the way, in synchronic typologies, there are new projects. Again, Olgu, you can invite me. I can talk with you about synchronic typologies because this is very interesting. You know, many of the projects that we book from the internet arrive somewhere. So some synchronic typologies integrate the store at the underground of the building, and all this kind of shipment, organization of goods before it goes to the different people take place within the building. And some of the people in the building are actually working in these underground spaces. So this is one approach to integrate between the new needs, of industry and the people that work at the same building. By the way, these kind of projects are taking place within the city center in London and in Toronto. They are not being built at the periphery, because at the end of the day, each one of you wants to get his own thing that he bought at the internet from Alibaba or AliExpress or whatever. So new topologies. Some of these new topologies are integrated in the same building in a different way. You can think about it in a section. One wing is residential and the other wing is production space. So there are various ways of integrating these kind of things. The question is where to place these new typologies or new buildings. So again, either in the factory or adjacent to the factory, or to develop a totally new type of building that support this kind of production.
From scratch.
And for me, for example, again, I work in the north, as I said, and there are a few abandoned big factories that were very much successful in the 60s. They were textile factories, and they are now empty. But now there are two entrepreneurs that are going to transform them into this kind of synchronic typologies, integrating production and residential. So, but one last word on that, we also have to be careful with that. We have to think, where do we want to place these type of new typologies?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have a question. For a readership, I think it's a kind of luxury to get an insight, a reflection on a forthcoming book by the author himself or herself. So thank you very much. But within your book, the research that you presented in the book, you mentioned Netherlands, Taiwan, Sweden, USA, but not specifically Israel. So as urban planners, we have learned a lot from the Israeli, planning tradition because of the scarcity of the land, the land control, development control, and land use regulations and institutions are quite strong and powerful in a way. So, what about the industrial, development tendencies in Israel? Is it in the phase of a transformation? Do you also introduce some innovative, guidelines and policies to control the future industrial developments?
Well, this is a good question. Actually, in the book, we have one example from Israel, but I work closely with the Ministry of Economy. Israel is very small, so we also sometimes in the academia help defining policies. So I'm working closely with the Ministry of Economy, who is responsible for the development of industrial areas. And yes, we try to introduce these different. I'm actually doing planning for them. I have a big strategic plan in the North Periphery and in the South Periphery, different projects. We try to implement this. I can say it's not easy because when you introduce all these new ideas, we have to change regulation, but it is a process. So for example, one of the big challenges for us now, what I have now on the table, is how to integrate public buildings and more specifically kindergartens for the workers in the southern southern industrial area of Israel. It seems a very basic and simple thing to integrate, right? Kindergarten in the industrial area. You want a woman to work. This would be very a nice experience for them. You want them to have the children nearby. Everyone wants that, but in terms of regulation, health regulation, it's a huge challenge. And also in terms of environmental regulations, we have to do a lot on this as well. So even a small thing, which we know it's crucial for the future employment of women in industrial areas, all these changes require lots of patience and lots of struggles. And yes, I'm part of this change right now, but it is a process.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Feridun Duyguler has a question. Please, hocam, if you turn on your voice. Yeah.
Thank you very much, especially for Tali Hatuka. And I want especially ask about the defense industry, because in Ankara, there are lots of increase in land use of defense industries, but all these industries are not according to the planning, are not according to the master planning of Ankara. Okay, let's leave it on side. But what do you think about these defense industries in terms of technical, theoretical, political, and as well as in planning issues? Do you have any spatial normative models, or do you have any utopian models, or do you have any integrative models with the city? What are those defense industries in this today's agenda?
Well, I think defense industry, you mean military industries?
Of course.
Okay. So I think in Israel, military industries are not adjacent to the cities. And I think that this is a very difficult question for urban planner worldwide. Also in the US, the defense or the military industries are isolated. And I think this is something that is being thought and regulated beyond our capacities. So I don't have any examples. I can say also from cases that we looked at in the US, it's something that is something that it doesn't take. It's something that we cannot approach or touch it because the decisions are being made at the government level, and it's not on the municipal or the regional level at all, unfortunately. And maybe you can do something if the government is wishing to initiate a sort of regeneration plan or reassessment plan. But if this is not the case, it's really difficult. I have to say one more thing referring to this question, that in all cases that we have looked at, it's both top-down process, but also bottom-up. So top-down process is really important because funding and the idea or the initiation of doing something regarding industrial areas need to get the support of the government. By the way, government all over the world are the ones that manage industry and production because it's part of the geopolitical game. Industry is not just a physical project, it's not just a social project, it's part of the geopolitical power of states, of nations. So there is always involvement top-down. But what we see, and this is the new thing, that when you look at the different case studies from all over the world, without bottom-up intervention, without the involvement of the business people, without the involvement of the factory, and management, nothing will happen. So the bottom-up process is really mandatory for the success of new industrial urbanism.
Exactly. So it's a big swallow for the cities. So sometimes it transcends the local, public interest conditions as well. So it's a very critical point you addressed. We enjoyed the room provided with the lack of our second presenter. We created a kind of opportunity out of crisis. So we have another question. At the intersection process of new age industry 4.0 and city planning, do you offer specific industry universities at these industrial campuses? What should be the key points for this kind of universities? Thank you.
I think this is a great question. It's a fascinating question. And again, from my experience at the north part of Israel, which is very much focused on food tech industry, it's what we call the chicken and the egg. So at the North Galilee, for example, they had a few researchers that focused on the food tech. Suddenly there were some industries that developed and respond to this knowledge. And this has started to evolve. So if I have to answer this, again, it comes to the question of context. I would say one thing for the person that asked me that: university must respond to industrial needs in their area, because universities are the places where future labor and the human resource for these new industries is emerging. So without creating this kind of chain of mind, labor, and resources and the integration of it, industry would not be successful, specifically industry 4. So for example, again, but you cannot create something from scratch. I think that you need to understand what type of industry could emerge in the context of industry 4, and then clearly the universities must approach that and develop particular program to support that in order to maintain the specific industry in place and in the region. So this is a great question, very relevant, very important. And if we look, for example, again at Kendall Square, the biotech there industry or the biotech cluster that you have there is specifically emerged as part or as response to what happens at MIT and Harvard, right? They develop this, and this is kind of cluster that have emerged as part of what happens there in the universities. So when we look at cases, you cannot really separate industry 4 from universities, and they need to be responsive to one another. So again, this is a very contextual question. I mean, I think that, but very, very important.
Yeah, Tali, we made you quite exhausted. Sorry for that, but I would like to finish that session with a remark-like question asked by Ecem Engin. She says, "Do you think that industries will continue to separate itself from the settlements, inner cities?" I think not. Right? This is it was one of the main, underlying idea that you showed for the future transition, right? If you would like to respond
I
on
would
that.
I would say for this, first, thank you for, I have to say that 1 hour and a half, I don't know how much did I talk. It's wonderful. I mean, I don't get this platform every day, and it's a great thing because, again, we want to push our book and it's going to be open access soon to everyone. But I would say, again, the answer is not yes or no. I mean, we see a very strong trend of integrating. New industrial urbanism is pushing towards integrating industry in cities, but it's not going to happen everywhere, and it's not going to happen with all industries. As have been asked here about the military industries, they will never be integrated into the city, right? And all the polluting industries, they're not going to be integrated into the city. And so there is, again, a need to talk about the different industries. When we talk about new industrial industries, we talk about clean industries, we talk about medium, small industries, we talk about the wide spectrum, but we talk about a particular type of industries and not all of them. And so some settlements will continue to be autonomous and isolated from industry, as some industries are going to be isolated from cities. So the question is a little bit more complex, but in general, the trend, yes. In an urbanized area, we talk about this trend as something that is going to change the reality of cities and the daily life of people in cities.
Yeah. So we should be much more specific when talking about the global trends, right? Regarding the types of,
yeah. I have to say that, again, different from the 20th century, that we talked about global utopian models that could be placed everywhere. This is not the case anymore. When we talk about new industrial urbanism, and all these strategies that I presented are very, very delicate and should be implemented with a lot of research. And if people want to be successful, if urban designers want to be successful, they need to include research and much more sensitive approach to the context.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you all and for hosting me.
Beautiful discussion. I think it was so fruitful for us. So it's pity that we couldn't be together with Professor Sargın, Güven Arif Sargın, in another occasion. I hope we will come together again, as you said. And I would like to thank to all the audience for those thought-provoking questions as well.